I took an unpaid day off work to drive my mother to her medical appointment because family was supposed to come before money. When I got home that afternoon, my sister-in-law was calmly changing the locks on my mother's house. She said it was for safety, and my brother nodded like that explained everything. My mother sat in a lawn chair, holding a folder she did not recognize. Inside it, there was a signature that looked like hers. That was the moment I realized the house was not what they were after. I took an unpaid day off work to drive my mother to her medical appointment, because that is what you do when someone raised you alone and then suddenly cannot lift her own arm. I could have picked up an extra shift, wiring a retail renovation in Tempe, but I did not. Money can wait, I told myself. Family cannot. The morning started the same way most mornings did in our house on the west side of Phoenix. The air was already warm before the sun fully cleared the rooftops. I filled a plastic pill organizer at the kitchen counter, while my mother sat at the table, watching my hands like she was afraid I might disappear if she blinked too long. Her coffee went cold because she forgot to drink it. I reheated it anyway. My name is Nora Kelly. I am 32 years old, and I work as a union electrician. I pull wire, install panels, climb ladders, and come home with dust in my hair and cuts on my hands. I am not delicate. I am not dramatic. I fix things that stop working. That is why, for a long time, I believed I could fix what was happening inside our house. My mother had her stroke 8 months earlier, right there in the living room, halfway through an episode of a game show she loved. One moment she was laughing at a contestant, the next, her face tilted, and her mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. I was home that day because my job had been rained out. If I had not been, she would have laid there alone. Since then, life had narrowed. Pills at 7 and noon and 9, physical therapy twice a week, follow-up appointments that all smelled like disinfectant and old magazines. I moved back into her small stucco house without thinking about it. It was never a question. 2 months after the stroke, my younger brother Evan came back to Phoenix. He brought his wife with him. Tessa arrived smiling, arms full of grocery bags, perfume sharp and clean. She hugged my mother carefully, like she had practiced, and called her Mom on the first day. Evan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around the house like he was measuring something. I was relieved. That is the truth. I thought help had arrived. The house was not big. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a narrow living room that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Evan and Tessa took the spare room. I gave up my dresser space without being asked. It felt temporary. Everything felt temporary back then. At first, Tessa did all the right things. She made color-coded charts for medications. She suggested grab bars in the shower. She spoke softly to my mother, enunciating every word like she was talking to a child. It made my skin crawl a little, but I told myself I was being unfair. I left for work before sunrise most days. Steel-toed boots by the door, lunch packed in a brown paper bag. When I came home, dinner was usually on the table. Evan would talk about plans, about business ideas, about something online that was about to take off. I nodded and ate. Then, small things started to move. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough that I noticed, and then talked myself out of noticing. One afternoon, I came home and my mother could not find the envelope where she kept her property tax papers. Tessa said she had reorganized the filing system to make it easier. She held up a neat beige folder and smiled like she had done us a favor. Another day, the front door lock felt different under my hand. Tighter, new. Tessa said Evan had changed it for safety. She did not say safety from what. I asked my mother if she minded. She shrugged and said she did not remember. That should have scared me. Instead, I went to take a shower. The day of the medical appointment, the air conditioner in the car rattled like it might give up at any moment. My mother stared out the window as we drove east, the sun washing the street signs pale. At the clinic, I filled out paperwork while she struggled to sign her name on the line. Her hand shook. I slid the paper closer, so she would not have to reach. On the drive back, she fell asleep with her mouth open, chin dipping toward her chest. I watched her in the rearview mirror at stoplights and felt that familiar tightness behind my ribs. Responsibility sits heavy when you do not get to put it down. When we turned onto our street, something was wrong. A pickup truck I did not recognize was parked in the driveway. The front door was open. Metal clinked against metal. I parked and helped my mother out of the car. She moved slowly, one step at a time, cane tapping the concrete. The sun was high now, bright enough to make me squint. Tessa was kneeling by the front door with a toolbox open beside her. She held a set of keys in one hand and a new lock cylinder in the other. Evan stood nearby, scrolling on his phone. "Oh good, you are back," Tessa said, without looking up. "We are almost done." "Done with what?" I asked. She glanced at me, still smiling. "Changing the locks. Just in case." "In case of what?" I said again. She shrugged, like it was obvious. "You know, safety. It is better this way." Evan finally looked up. He nodded once, quick and small, like he wanted the conversation over. My mother lowered herself into one of the plastic lawn chairs we kept by the door. Her hands rested in her lap. She was holding the beige folder. I did not ask where she got it. I just watched. Inside the house, the air felt different, quieter, like the walls were listening. I followed Tessa into the living room, my boots leaving faint marks on the tile. She set the keys on the counter, neat, deliberate. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself not to overreact. I had spent years working with men who raised their voices at the first sign of resistance. I had learned that volume did not equal control. "Why did you not tell me you were changing the locks?" I said. Tessa tilted her head. "You were at work. And it does not really affect you." That sentence landed wrong. Evan cleared his throat. "It is no big deal, Nora. Tessa is just trying to help." "Help who?" I asked. "Both of you," Tessa said quickly. "Especially your mom." My mother shifted in her chair. She did not look at me. She opened the folder and then closed it again, like she was unsure what it was supposed to do. "What is in the folder, Mom?" I asked. She hesitated. Tessa stepped closer, one hand resting lightly on my mother's shoulder. "Just some paperwork," she said. "Nothing for you to worry about." I noticed then that the folder was heavier than it should have been. Thick. Official. I reached for it. Tessa's hand tightened, just for a second, then relaxed. I had a strange thought, standing there in my work boots, dust still on my jeans. This is what it feels like when a circuit is live, and you do not know it yet. My mother finally looked up at me. Her eyes were tired, confused. She said, "Tessa said it would make things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked again. No one answered. The new lock clicked into place with a clean, final sound. I stood there, in the doorway of the house I had grown up in, and felt something shift under my feet. I did not know what they were doing yet. I did not know how far it would go, but I knew, with a clarity that made my hands go cold, that whatever I thought was solid was already being moved. After that afternoon, the house began to feel smaller, even though nothing about its size had changed. The walls were the same pale yellow my mother had painted years ago. The couch still sagged in the middle. The air still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and warm dust. But something invisible had been rearranged, and I could not put it back where it belonged. I started waking up earlier than usual. Not because I needed to, but because sleep no longer felt safe. I would lie in bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes, the occasional car passing outside. Sometimes I heard voices in the living room before dawn. When I got up to check, the lights were off and the house was quiet again. At work, my hands kept moving on autopilot. Pull wire, strip insulation, tighten screws. My foreman noticed I was quieter than usual and asked if everything was all right. I told him yes, because that was easier than explaining how your own house can start slipping out from under you without making a sound. When I got home in the evenings, Tessa was often on the phone. She would lower her voice when I walked in, turning slightly away like she was protecting the call from me. Evan sat at the table with his laptop open, screen tilted so I could not see what was on it. He always closed it when I came too close. My mother stayed in her chair by the window most days, watching the street. Sometimes she asked me the same question twice within 5 minutes. Sometimes she forgot she had already eaten dinner and asked again. I answered patiently, even when my chest felt tight. One night, while I was washing dishes, I noticed a stack of mail on the counter that I did not recognize. Envelopes from the county, from a bank, from places that did not usually send anything to our house. They were already opened. I picked one up. Tessa appeared behind me so quietly that I jumped. "Oh, those," she said lightly. "I was just taking care of some paperwork for your mom." "Why were they opened?" I asked. She smiled. "Because she asked me to help." I looked at my mother. She was half asleep in her chair, chin tilted down, mouth slightly open. I doubted she had asked for anything. That night, I lay awake thinking about the folder, the beige one that kept appearing and disappearing. Sometimes it was on the coffee table. Sometimes it was tucked under Tessa's arm. I never saw my mother open it on her own. A few days later, I came home early because a job site inspection got pushed back. The house was quiet, too quiet, no television, no voices. The beige folder sat on the dining table. I stood there for a long moment, my boots still on, my lunch bag hanging from my hand. The folder was closed, neat, deliberate. It felt like it was waiting. I told myself I was not snooping. I told myself I lived here. I told myself this was my mother. I opened it. Inside were copies of documents, not originals, copies, property tax statements, utility bills, a form with the county seal at the top. I did not understand all of it, but I understood enough to feel my pulse pick up. There were lines, boxes, places for signatures. I flipped through carefully, like the paper might cut me if I moved too fast. Then I heard the front door open. I closed the folder just as Tessa walked in. She stopped when she saw me standing there. "Oh," she said, "you are home early. You left this out," I said, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes flicked to the folder and back to my face. She did not rush toward it. She did not panic. She just sighed, like I had inconvenienced her. "I was going to put that away," she said. "Those things can be confusing if you do not know what you are looking at." "What am I looking at?" I asked. She tilted her head again, that practiced gesture. "Things to make sure your mom is taken care of. You work a lot. Evan and I are just trying to be responsible." "Responsible how?" "By planning ahead." She reached for the folder. I did not move out of the way. "Planning for what, Tessa?" Her smile thinned. "You do not have to interrogate me." "I am not interrogating you. I am asking." She held my gaze for a second longer than comfortable. Then she shrugged. "You worry too much, Nora. Not everything is a threat." I stepped aside and let her take the folder. The moment passed, but it did not disappear. After that, the way people spoke to me in the house shifted. Subtly. Like a tone adjustment you do not notice until the music sounds wrong. Tessa corrected me when I spoke to my mother, even about small things. Evan stopped including me in conversations about plans. When extended family called to check on my mother, Tessa answered the phone and spoke for her. One afternoon, my aunt called me directly. "Your mom seems tired lately," she said carefully. "Tessa says you have been under a lot of stress." I felt something harden behind my ribs. "What did she say I was stressed about?" I asked. "Oh, you know, work. Living situation. She said it has been hard on everyone." Everyone. That night, I confronted Evan in the backyard. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and pink over the rooftops. He leaned against the fence, arms crossed, eyes on the ground. "Why is Tessa handling all the paperwork?" I asked. "Because she is better at that stuff," he said quickly. "Better than who?" "Better than both of us," he snapped, then looked surprised at himself. He sighed. "Look, Nora, you are gone all day. You are exhausted when you get home. Tessa just wants to make things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked again. "For Mom." I stared at him. "Since when do you call her Mom?" He did not answer. A week later, I came home to find a man sitting at the kitchen table with my mother. He wore a button-down shirt and carried a leather briefcase. Tessa poured him iced tea like this was a normal afternoon visit. "This is Mark," she said. "He is helping us with some planning." "Planning what?" I asked. Mark smiled, polite but distant. "Just discussing options." "Options for who?" Tessa's hand rested on my mother's shoulder again. "For her future." I noticed then that my mother's eyes looked glassy. She nodded at things a beat too late. When the man asked her questions, Tessa answered for her. I did not interrupt. I watched. I listened. I memorized. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood alone in the living room and looked at the walls, the pictures, the small cracks near the ceiling. I had fixed every outlet in this house at some point. I knew where the wiring ran behind the drywall. I knew where the weak spots were. I also knew that no one had ever tried to take it from the inside before. The next morning, as I tied my boots by the door, my mother called my name. "Nora," she said softly. I turned. "Are you mad at me?" The question hit harder than anything else had. "No," I said immediately. "Of course not." She nodded, but she did not look convinced. Tessa appeared in the doorway behind her, watching us with an expression I could not read. I left for work with my stomach tight and my thoughts racing. Somewhere between tightening a junction box and climbing down a ladder, something in my head clicked into place. If something was wrong, it would leave a trace. People who move things quietly still leave fingerprints. People who tell stories still trip over details. People who think you are not paying attention always underestimate how much you see. I did not know what Tessa was doing yet. I did not know how far Evan was involved. I did not even know exactly what was being taken. But I knew one thing for certain. I could not afford to keep pretending that this was just family tension. Whatever was happening in that house was already past the point where silence was safe. Once I stopped pretending, the house showed me exactly how much had already changed. It was not one big confrontation. It was a series of small corrections, each one shaving off a little more of who I was allowed to be inside my own home. Tessa began to speak for my mother, even when my mother was sitting right there. If I asked a simple question, like whether she wanted soup or a sandwich, Tessa would answer first. Evan followed her lead, nodding along, as if this was the natural order of things now. When I pushed back, even gently, the reaction was always the same. Calm voices, concerned looks, the suggestion that I was overworked. "You have been pulling a lot of long days," Tessa said one evening as we stood at the kitchen counter. Anyone would be on edge. I was not on edge. I was paying attention. At work, I started taking pictures of my job schedules, saving pay stubs, documenting my hours. I did not know why yet. It was instinct, the same instinct that makes you double-check a breaker before touching a wire. At home, I started noticing patterns. The beige folder was never left unattended anymore. When Tessa left the house, it went with her. When Evan left, it stayed locked in their bedroom. My mother never touched it. I noticed that my mother's phone was no longer where she usually kept it. When I asked her where it was, she looked around the room like she had never seen it before. Tessa said it was charging in their room because my mother kept forgetting to plug it in. One afternoon, my mother asked me if I was still working at the same job. "Yes, Mom," I said. "I work every day." She nodded slowly. "Tessa says you are gone a lot." I swallowed. "Gone where?" She shrugged. "Out." That night, I lay awake replaying the word in my head. Out. As if I had stepped outside of my own life. A few days later, I came home to find a new filing cabinet in the hallway. Small, gray, locked. Tessa said it was easier than having papers all over the place. "What papers?" I asked. "House stuff," she said. "Medical stuff. It is boring." I reached for the drawer. It did not budge. The next morning, my aunt showed up unannounced with a casserole. She hugged my mother, then pulled me aside near the fridge. "I just wanted to check on you," she said quietly. "Tessa mentioned things have been tense." "Tense how?" I asked. She hesitated. "She said you have been struggling since moving back home, that you feel stuck." I stared at her. "Did she say that?" My aunt nodded, uncomfortable. "She seemed worried about you." That was the moment I understood something important. Tessa was not just moving paperwork, she was moving the story. I was no longer the daughter who had come home to help. I was becoming the problem that needed managing. I confronted Evan again, this time in the driveway where there were no walls to listen. "Why are people saying I am unstable?" I asked him. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Nobody said unstable." "Then what did they say?" He exhaled hard. "Look, Nora, you are intense. You always have been. You take everything personally." I felt my jaw tighten. Since when is asking questions taking things personally? "Since you started acting like we are doing something wrong." "Are you doing something wrong, Evan?" He did not answer. He looked past me, toward the street, like he was waiting for someone to save him from the conversation. That night, I found my mother crying quietly in her room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, tissue in her hand. "What is wrong?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. She looked at me like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Tessa says you are unhappy here," she whispered, "that you feel trapped because of me." My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. "Did she say that?" I asked. She nodded. "She says she is worried you will resent me." I took my mother's hands in mine. They felt thinner than they used to. "I am here because I want to be," I said. "I am not trapped. I am not angry at you." She searched my face, like she was trying to decide who to believe. Later that night, I stood in the hallway outside Evan and Tessa's room. I could hear their voices through the door, low and urgent. "You said she would not notice," Evan whispered. "She will calm down," Tessa replied. "She just needs to accept that things are changing." "What if she does not?" "Then we move faster." I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding. My hand brushed the wall as I turned away, and for a second I felt dizzy, like the house itself was tilting. The next day, I took my lunch break sitting in my truck instead of the break room. I pulled up the county website on my phone and searched our address. Most of it looked normal, tax records, basic information, but there was a section marked Recent Activity. There was an entry dated 3 weeks earlier. Document recorded. I stared at the screen, sunlight glaring off the glass. My hands were steady, my breathing was not. That evening, I asked my mother directly if she had signed anything recently. She frowned. "Signed what?" "Anything. Papers. Forms." She shook her head slowly. "Tessa helped with some things. I do not remember signing." "Do you remember someone coming to the house?" I asked. "Someone with a briefcase." She hesitated. "Maybe. I was tired that day." My stomach dropped. That night, after everyone went to bed, I pulled on a hoodie and stepped outside. The air was cooler, the street quiet. I walked to the neighbor's house 2 doors down. Mrs. Alvarez had lived there longer than anyone else on the block. She opened the door with a surprised smile. "Nora," she said, "everything okay?" I asked her if she had seen anyone coming to our house during the day recently, anyone unfamiliar. She thought for a moment. "Yes, a man. A few times. Nice shirt. Always came when you were gone." "What did he do?" "He stayed inside for a while. He talked a lot. Your sister-in-law was very friendly." My chest felt hollow. When I went back inside, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving in. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to slow my breathing. I told myself not to panic. Panic leads to mistakes. I needed proof. Not feelings. Not arguments. Proof. The next morning, I checked the camera attached to the doorbell. I had forgotten it was even there. I had installed it years ago after a string of car break-ins on the street. I scrolled back through the footage. There he was. Same man Mrs. Alvarez described. Button-down shirt, briefcase. He came 3 times, always mid-morning, always when I was at work. I watched my mother open the door for him. I watched Tessa guide her to the chair. I watched Evan stand off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. I saved every clip. I did not confront anyone. Not yet. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, who was home, what was said. I moved through the house quietly, like a guest, like someone who did not belong, because that was the version of me they were building. And the longer I watched, the clearer it became. They were not just planning something. They were counting on me to either explode or give up. I intended to do neither. Whatever they thought they were taking, they had underestimated one thing. I knew how to follow a line all the way to the source, and I was done letting them decide who I was in this story. The backyard gathering was Tessa's idea. She said it casually over breakfast one morning, like it had just occurred to her while stirring her coffee. A little family get-together, she called it. Nothing fancy, just food, a few people stopping by, a chance for everyone to relax. I did not want it. Every instinct in me pushed back, but I said nothing, because by then I understood that saying no only gave her something to frame. So I nodded and went to work. When I came home that Saturday afternoon, the backyard already looked different. Folding chairs lined the fence. A cheap grill smoked near the patio. Music played softly from a speaker on the table. Tessa had strung white lights along the eaves, even though the sun had hours before it went down. My mother sat under the shade of the old mesquite tree, a blanket over her legs even though it was warm. She looked smaller out there, surrounded by voices and movement. Relatives arrived in pairs. My aunt. 2 cousins I had not seen in months. A family friend who hugged me too tightly and said I looked tired. Neighbors wandered over, drawn by the smell of food. It felt like a performance, and I did not know the script. Evan moved through the group with a drink in his hand, laughing louder than necessary. Every few minutes, he glanced toward Tessa, like he was checking for approval. Tessa played her role perfectly. She refilled plates, touched arms, asked questions in a voice just soft enough to sound caring. When people asked how my mother was doing, Tessa answered before my mother could. "She is doing so much better," she said. "We have been really stepping up to take care of things." I stood near the edge of the patio, watching, listening. At some point, Tessa tapped her glass with a fork. Everyone turned. "I just want to say something real quick," she said, smiling. "I know this has been a hard year for our family, but Evan and I are committed to making sure everything is taken care of." She looked at my mother and squeezed her shoulder. "Especially for her." People nodded. Someone murmured how nice that was, and then she looked at me. "Of course," she said, glancing around like she was including everyone. "It has not been easy having so many people under one roof, but we are all adults here." My chest tightened. "I think it is important to talk about next steps," she continued. "About what makes sense going forward." I felt the air shift. Conversations quieted. Eyes turned. "Next steps for what?" I asked. She smiled wider. "The house." There it was. She spoke calmly, like she was discussing paint colors. She said it would be simpler if ownership was clear, easier for planning, easier for emergencies. I watched my mother, her hands twisted together in her lap. She did not look up. Tessa went on. "Evan and I are prepared to take on that responsibility. We have already started the process." My heart began to pound so loudly I was sure people could hear it. "What process?" I asked. She tilted her head, that same practiced gesture. "You know, legal stuff, so we can make decisions quickly if something happens." I stepped forward. "Decisions about what?" "About the house," she said, as if she had not already said it 3 times. "About her care." Someone cleared their throat. Another person shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Evan. "Is that true?" I asked him. He took a drink before answering. "We just want what is best for Mom," he said. "Best according to who?" Tessa laughed lightly. "Nora," she said, "you are being defensive." "Defensive about my mother's house," I said. The word hung there. One of my cousins spoke up, trying to smooth things over. "Maybe this is something you should talk about privately." Tessa shook her head. "It affects everyone," she said, "especially since Nora has been living here so long." There it was again. Living here. Not helping. Not caring for. Living. I felt heat rise up my neck. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked. She did not hesitate. "I am saying that it might be time for you to think about moving on." The backyard went quiet. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Move on where?" I asked. She shrugged. "You are capable. You have a good job. It is not healthy to be this attached." Attached. I felt like I had been slapped. I turned to my mother. "Mom," I said, "is this what you want?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Tessa. Tessa squeezed her shoulder again, gently, possessively. "She does not need to answer right now," she said. "This is just a conversation. A conversation where you tell me to leave my own house." "Our house," Evan corrected quietly. I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes were glassy, his jaw tight. He would not meet my gaze. People started talking at once. Advice, opinions, half-formed judgments. Someone said it was probably for the best. Someone else said families fight all the time. I felt myself stepping back, like my body knew something my mind was still catching up to. I walked into the house without another word. The bathroom door closed behind me with a soft click. I leaned against the sink and stared at my reflection. Dust on my cheeks, a faint smear of grease on my forearm from work that morning. I looked exactly like I always did, but I did not feel like myself. I stood there until my breathing slowed, until the noise in my head settled into something sharp and clear. When I walked back outside, the party had resumed. People were laughing again. Music played. Someone had turned the grill. No one noticed me approach the table. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second. Then I pressed record. I did not announce it. I did not warn anyone. Tessa noticed me then. "Everything okay?" she asked. I smiled. "I just wanted to be clear," I said. "You said the house was already in the process of changing ownership." She nodded, confident. "Yes." "When did that start?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Recently." "Who handled the paperwork?" She glanced at Evan. Then back at me. "Someone who knows what they are doing." I nodded slowly. "And Mom signed everything herself." She smiled again. "Of course." I turned to my mother. "Mom," I said gently, "do you remember signing papers about the house?" She looked confused. She looked scared. "I do not remember," she said quietly. The sound of the grill crackled. Someone coughed. Tessa's smile faltered. "She was tired that day," Tessa said quickly. I turned back to her. "Which day?" She opened her mouth, closed it. I let the silence stretch. I was not angry anymore. I was focused. "I understand," I said finally. "Thank you for explaining." Then I walked away. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg, because somewhere between the lawn chairs and the grill smoke, something had clicked into place. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. And the moment she said it out loud, in front of witnesses, she had made a mistake. She thought she was closing the door on me. What she had actually done was show me exactly where to start pulling. I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the party continued. Inside, I opened my notes app and wrote one sentence. "She thinks the house is already gone." And for the first time since all of this began, I knew something they did not. The house was not the only thing they were about to lose. The morning after the backyard gathering, the house felt like it was holding its breath. No one mentioned what had been said. No one apologized. Tessa moved through the kitchen as if nothing unusual had happened, humming softly while she packed my mother's pills into the organizer. Evan avoided my eyes, lingering in the hallway longer than necessary before leaving the house. I watched them both from the doorway, silent. I had spent most of the night awake, replaying every word, every pause, every look. Not with emotion, but with the same detached focus I use when something electrical fails and the cause is not obvious. You stop guessing. You start tracing. That was the moment I stopped being a daughter trying to keep the peace and became something else. An observer. I started with time. I wrote down when people left the house and when they returned. I noted when Tessa took my mother to appointments and when she did not. I recorded the hours Evan claimed he was working versus the hours his car sat unmoved in the driveway. I did this quietly, without confrontation, without letting my face change. At work, during breaks, I pulled county records again. I searched variations of our address. I followed links I did not understand until I did. One document led to another. Names repeated, filing dates clustered. I learned that documents do not appear out of nowhere. They leave trails. One evening, while Tessa was in the shower and Evan was outside on the phone, I checked the filing cabinet in the hallway. The gray one with the lock. It was locked, just like always. But locks only work if you do not know how they are installed. I removed the back panel with a screwdriver from my toolbox. 2 screws. That was all. Inside, the lock mechanism was cheap. I disengaged it carefully and slid the drawer open. The beige folder sat inside. I did not take it. I did not rearrange anything. I opened it just enough to photograph the contents with my phone. There it was. A notarized document titled Quitclaim Deed. My name was nowhere on it. My mother's name was spelled correctly. Her signature sat at the bottom, shaky but legible. The date made my stomach drop. It was signed on the same morning as her follow-up appointment, the same morning I had driven her across town and watched her struggle to hold a pen. I closed the drawer, resecured the lock, and replaced the panel exactly as it had been, no trace. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next day, I asked my mother a different question. "Do you remember someone coming to the house to help with paperwork?" I asked, while she watched birds at the feeder outside. She squinted, thinking. "A man," she said slowly. "He talked fast. Did he ask you questions?" She nodded. "Did he explain what you were signing?" She shook her head. "He said it was routine." Routine. I wrote that word down. I began cross-checking everything. The notary's name on the document, the address listed for him, the business name. It took 2 minutes to find an online complaint filed 3 years earlier. Different county. Same name. Same pattern. Elderly homeowners. Quick signatures. Confusion. At the bank, I waited in line during my lunch break and spoke to a teller who had known my mother for years. I did not accuse. I asked questions. "Has anyone else been asking about her accounts?" I said. The teller hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Someone came in with her last month," she said quietly. "Not you. Did they ask about withdrawals?" She nodded again. Larger amounts. Cash. I thanked her and walked out with my heart pounding. Back at the house, I noticed my mother's purse was no longer where she kept it. Tessa said it was safer in her room. Her phone was still charging there, too. My mother did not argue. She looked tired, smaller. That night, I sat on my bed with my notebook open and the door locked. I wrote down everything. Dates, times, documents, names. I drew arrows. I circled patterns. I stopped thinking like a family member and started thinking like someone preparing for court. Because that was where this was headed. I tested one more thing. The following Friday, I told Tessa I had an overnight job and would not be home until late Saturday. I left the house at my usual time, drove around the block, and parked 2 streets over. I waited. At 10:45 in the morning, a familiar sedan pulled into the driveway. The same man from the doorbell footage. I watched him enter the house. I waited 10 minutes. Then I opened the camera app. My mother answered the door again. Tessa guided her to the chair. Evan stood near the hallway, arms crossed. I recorded everything. The man opened his briefcase. Papers came out. Pens. A calm voice. My mother nodded slowly. I stayed in my truck until he left. That afternoon, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Tessa asked how my shift went. I said, fine. Evan asked if I was tired. I said a little. My mother asked if we had already eaten dinner. I said yes. I smiled. I listened. I waited. Because now I knew something they did not. This was not just about my mother's house. This was organized, rehearsed, repeated. And the most dangerous thing about people who believe they are smarter than you is that they stop checking whether you are still watching. I was watching, I was recording, and I was no longer guessing what was being taken. I was counting it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to deny. Once I had the deed, everything else snapped into a shape I could recognize. I did not rush. I did not confront anyone. I learned a long time ago that when people think they are winning, they make mistakes faster. All you have to do is give them space. I took a personal day and went to the county recorder's office downtown. The building smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People stood in quiet lines, holding folders like shields. When it was my turn, I slid the copied document across the counter and asked a simple question. Can you tell me if this has been fully processed? The clerk typed, clicked, frowned slightly, then turned the screen toward me. It had been recorded, official, time-stamped. The house had been transferred out of my mother's sole ownership and into joint ownership with Evan. Not Tessa, Evan. My throat tightened, but my hands stayed steady. Is there any indication of capacity review? I asked. Medical clearance. Anything like that. The clerk shook her head. Quitclaim deeds do not require it, she said, as long as the signature is notarized. I thanked her and stepped aside. Outside, the heat hit me like a wall. I stood on the sidewalk and stared at the passing cars, trying to slow my breathing. I had expected Evan to be involved. But seeing his name in black and white made it real in a way nothing else had. That was when I understood the structure of it. Tessa was the driver. Evan was the legal bridge. My mother was the asset. And I was the obstacle. I went back inside and requested copies of everything. Every filing. Every attachment. I paid the fee without blinking. At home, I laid the documents out on my bed like a map. There were details that did not line up. Dates that clashed. A notary stamp that looked slightly off-center. I zoomed in on my phone and compared it to official samples online. The font spacing was wrong. That night, I called a lawyer. I did not know what kind of lawyer I needed, so I started with the State Bar referral line. They transferred me twice before I landed with a woman named Rachel, who specialized in elder financial abuse. She listened without interrupting while I explained. When I finished, there was a pause. "Do not confront them again," she said finally. "Not yet. I was not planning to." "Good. Also, you need to understand something. If this goes to court, intent matters. And so does timing." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Documentation. Everything you have. And one more thing." "What?" "You need to determine whether your brother is acting under coercion or as a willing participant." That question stayed with me long after we hung up. Over the next week, I watched Evan more closely. He was unraveling. He slept late. He snapped at small things. He paced when he thought no one was looking. Once, I saw him pull a folded piece of paper from his wallet and stare at it before shoving it back in like it burned. I did not ask. I waited. Tessa, meanwhile, grew bolder. She spoke openly now about renovations, about refinancing, about how much equity the house had gained over the years. She never mentioned my name. She did not have to. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table with my mother and said something that made my stomach turn. "Once everything is settled," she said brightly, "we can finally make this place work for everyone." My mother nodded, confused. "What does settled mean?" Mom asked. Tessa smiled. "Ownership. Security. Security for who? For us." I excused myself and went to my room, closed the door, and called Rachel back. "They are escalating," I said. "Good," she replied. "That means they think the window is closing." 2 days later, I went back to the bank. This time, I asked to speak with a manager. I brought my documentation. I brought my calm. I did not accuse. I asked for a review of account activity tied to power of attorney access. The manager frowned as she scanned the records. "There have been several cash withdrawals," she said slowly, "and a loan inquiry." "Loan." "Yes. A personal loan application initiated online. Not yet approved." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Who initiated it?" I asked. She shook her head. "I cannot disclose that without authorization." But I could see it in her eyes. It was not my mother. I left the bank shaking. That night, I finally spoke to Evan alone. I found him sitting in his car in the driveway, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. "You need to tell me what is going on," I said, opening the passenger door and sitting down. He did not look at me. "It is complicated," he muttered. "Everything illegal always is." He laughed weakly. "You always think you are smarter than everyone else." "I think you are scared," I said. That did it. He slammed his hand against the wheel. "You have no idea," he snapped. "Then tell me." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. "Tessa has people," he said. "Friends. Connections. They helped me out when I needed it." "Helped you how?" He swallowed. "Loans. Short term. I was going to pay it back." "With what money, Evan?" He did not answer. "She said the house could fix everything," he said finally. "That it was just paperwork. Temporary." I closed my eyes. "Did you know she was applying for loans in Mom's name?" He went still. "What?" I watched his face as the words landed. Shock, fear, real fear. "No," he said quickly. "No, she would not do that." I said nothing. He stared straight ahead, breathing hard. That is when I knew. Evan was guilty, but he was also trapped. The next morning, I filed an emergency petition with Rachel's help. We requested a temporary freeze on any further transfers and an immediate review of my mother's capacity at the time of signing. The notice was served that afternoon. Tessa read it at the kitchen counter, her smile finally gone. "What is this?" she demanded. "Protection," I said. She looked at Evan. He looked away. "You are blowing this up," she said, voice sharp. "You think you are some kind of hero." "No," I said. "I think you underestimated me." She laughed, but it sounded thin. "You cannot stop this," she said. "It is already done." I met her gaze. "No," I said quietly. "It just started." That night, my mother slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Outside my locked bedroom door, I could hear Tessa pacing. I sat on my bed, documents spread around me, phone charging, recorder ready. For months, they had moved pieces while I stayed still. Now the board had flipped, and they were the ones running out of room. After the notice was served, the house split cleanly down the middle. Not physically, emotionally. On one side, there was my mother, quieter than ever, moving through the rooms like she was afraid to leave fingerprints. On the other side, there was Tessa, sharp and restless, her movements suddenly loud, her words edged with accusation. Evan drifted between us, never fully standing anywhere, like a wire that had come loose and did not know where to reconnect. No one spoke about the papers directly. They did not have to. They sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days, face down, as if pretending they were invisible would make them disappear. Tessa was the first to break the silence. She waited until my mother was napping in her room and Evan had stepped outside to take a call. Then she turned to me, arms crossed, blocking the hallway. "You really did this," she said. "You went behind our backs." "I went in front of the law," I replied. She scoffed. "You are acting like we are criminals. You applied for a transfer of a house owned by a woman recovering from a stroke without full disclosure," I said. "That is not acting." Her eyes flashed. "Everything we did was for her benefit." "Then why hide it from me?" "Because you are impossible," she snapped. "You always have to control everything." The word hit like it was meant to. I looked at her carefully. This was the version of the story she wanted. Me as the rigid sister, the unreasonable obstacle, the one who could not let go. I did not argue. I stepped around her and walked outside. Evan was pacing near the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and tense. When he saw me, he turned away, but I caught a few words. "I told you I would handle it." "No, she is not backing down." He hung up and shoved the phone into his pocket. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one," he said too quickly. That evening, things escalated. A courier arrived just before sunset with another envelope. This one thicker, legal language printed in heavy black ink. Tessa snatched it off the counter and tore it open. "What the hell is this?" she said, skimming the pages. It was a response, a denial of any immediate action on her side, pending investigation. The freeze was in effect. She crumpled the paper in her hand. "They cannot do this," she said. "They cannot just stop everything." "They can," I said. And they did. She turned on Evan. "You told me this would work," she hissed. Evan's face flushed. "I told you it was temporary." "Temporary does not mean stuck," she shot back. My mother's door opened quietly behind us. "What is going on?" she asked. We all froze. "Nothing," Tessa said immediately, forcing a smile. "Just talking." My mother looked from her to Evan to me. Her brow furrowed. "Why are you angry?" she asked softly. Tessa inhaled, visibly restraining herself. She walked over and knelt in front of my mother, voice syrupy sweet. "No one is angry, Mom. We are just sorting things out." "Sorting what?" my mother asked. "The house," Evan said before Tessa could stop him. The word hung in the air. My mother's face drained of color. "The house," she repeated. "What about the house?" Tessa shot Evan a look that could have cut glass. I stepped forward. "Mom," I said gently. "Do you remember signing papers about the house?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I do not think so." Tessa's jaw tightened. "You were tired that day," she said quickly. "You asked me to help. "I did not ask you to help with my house," my mother said. Her voice was small, but it was clear. The room went silent. Evan swallowed hard. "Mom," he said, "we were just trying to make sure everything was okay." "Okay for who?" my mother asked. "For all of us," he said weakly. My mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to me. "Nora," she said, "why does this feel wrong?" I took her hand. "Because it is," I said. Tessa stood abruptly. "This is exactly what I mean," she said sharply. "You are confusing her." "No," I replied. "You are." That was the first time I said it out loud. Her face hardened. "You think you are so righteous," she said, "marching in with your paperwork and your accusations." "I think you counted on us staying quiet," I said. She laughed, short and bitter. "You have no idea who you are messing with." That night, I locked my door again. I lay awake, listening to the house settle, to footsteps pacing, to muffled arguments behind closed doors. At one point, something hit the wall hard enough to rattle the frame. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. "Unknown number," I answered. "Nora Kelly," a man said. "This is Detective Harris, with the County Elder Abuse Unit." My heart skipped. "We received a referral connected to your mother's property," he continued. "I would like to ask you a few questions." "Yes," I said. "When?" "Today," he replied. "If possible." He came in the afternoon. Detective Harris was older, with tired eyes and a voice that stayed calm no matter what was said to him. He sat at the kitchen table while my mother rested in her room and asked careful, precise questions. Who lived in the house? Who handled finances? Who scheduled appointments? Who had access to documents? Tessa hovered nearby, arms folded, interrupting whenever she could. "I was just helping," she kept saying. "Helping without transparency is a problem," Detective Harris replied evenly. Evan sat with his head in his hands. The detective asked to see the documents. I handed them over. The copies, the recordings, the timeline I had built piece by piece. He nodded slowly as he reviewed them. "This is not the first time I have seen this pattern," he said quietly. Tessa stiffened. "What pattern?" she asked. He looked at her. "Isolation. Influence. Pressure. Rapid asset transfer." Evan flinched. When the detective left, he said he would be in touch. The door closed behind him, and the house fell silent again. That night, Evan knocked on my door. I did not open it right away. "Please," he said softly, "we need to talk." I opened the door. He looked wrecked, eyes red, shoulders slumped. "I did not know it would go this far," he said. "I swear." "I believe you," I said. He looked up sharply. "You do." "I believe you did not think it through," I said. "That does not mean you are not responsible." He sank onto the edge of my bed, head in his hands. "She said it was the only way," he whispered. "That if I did not help, everything would fall apart." "Everything already did," I said. He nodded, tears spilling now. "I am scared, Nora." "So am I," I said. "But fear is not an excuse anymore." He looked at me. "What happens now?" I took a breath. "Now," I said, "the truth comes out. Whether anyone likes it or not." Outside my door, the house creaked softly. The story they had been telling was starting to crack. And once a crack appears, it never stops spreading. Once the detective entered the picture, time stopped moving like it used to. Days no longer blended together. Each one had edges. Appointments, phone calls, waiting. Detective Harris called 2 days later and asked me to come down to the county office with any additional documentation I had. I took the morning off work and drove downtown, my toolbox still rattling in the back of the truck because I had forgotten to unload it the night before. The sound followed me all the way there, a reminder that my real life was still running somewhere else while this one sat under a microscope. The office was quiet, neutral, no family photos, no personal touches. Harris sat across from me with a legal pad and a recorder on the table between us. He explained what the process would look like in plain terms. They would review the transfer. They would assess my mother's capacity at the time of signing. They would interview everyone involved. If they found a pattern connected to other cases, it could expand. "This can take time," he said, "and it can get uncomfortable." I nodded. I had already crossed that line. He asked me to walk through everything again, from the beginning. I stuck to facts, dates, actions, documents. I did not talk about feelings. I did not speculate. I let the evidence speak. When I finished, he stopped the recorder. "One more thing," he said. "You should prepare yourself. These situations often involve pressure on family members to recant or cooperate." "Pressure how?" I asked. "Threats, guilt, offers, sometimes all three." I thanked him and left with my stomach tight. By the time I got home, the house felt tense in a way I could almost see. Tessa's car was gone. Evan sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. "She went out," he said, without looking up. "Where?" He shrugged. "She said she needed air." That evening, Tessa did not come home. She texted Evan once, late. Just 2 words. "Do not worry." I did not sleep. The next morning, my mother woke up confused and frightened, asking why everyone was upset. I made her breakfast and told her we were handling paperwork. That was all. She nodded, but I could tell she sensed the fracture underneath. In the afternoon, the bank called. They wanted to verify activity on my mother's account. There had been an attempted withdrawal that morning. It was flagged. My hands clenched around the phone. "Who tried to withdraw it?" I asked. "We cannot disclose that," the representative said, "but we have temporarily restricted access pending review." "Good," I said. "Thank you." When Evan came home that night, he was shaking. "She is panicking," he said. "She says everything is falling apart." I looked at him. "Good," I said quietly. He flinched. "I do not mean I want her hurt," I added. "I mean panic makes people careless." He sank into a chair. "She keeps saying I owe her," he said. "That she saved me. That if I talk, I ruin everything." "Ruin what, Evan?" "Our future." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. "You do not have a future built on stealing from our mother," I said. He nodded miserably. That night, he did something I did not expect. He handed me his phone. "She has been messaging me nonstop," he said. "I cannot do this alone." I scrolled. There it was. The pressure. The language. The subtle threats wrapped in affection. She reminded him of the money she had covered, the people she knew, the consequences if he betrayed her. I took screenshots of everything. The next day, Detective Harris interviewed Evan. I stayed out of it. I took my mother to physical therapy and sat in the waiting room, scrolling through my phone, pretending to read the news while my heart pounded. When we got home, Evan was already there. He looked drained, but lighter, like something heavy had been put down. "I told them everything," he said. I believed him. That afternoon, the call came. "Rachel, my lawyer. They have enough to expand the investigation," she said. "This is not staying contained to your family." "What does that mean?" "It means the notary is under review, and the intermediary, and potentially anyone connected to multiple filings." I closed my eyes. What happens to the house? For now, it stays frozen. No sale. No refinancing. Nothing moves. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. That evening, Tessa returned. She walked in like nothing had happened, hair perfect, makeup flawless, smile tight. She set her purse down and looked at all of us. "So," she said, "I see we are involving the authorities now." Evan did not answer. I did. "Yes," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You think this ends well for you." I met her gaze. "I think it ends with the truth," I said. "Wherever that lands." She laughed softly. "You always were dramatic, Nora." I did not respond. She turned to Evan. "Did you talk?" she asked. He swallowed. "Yes." Her face changed then. Not anger. Calculation. She nodded once. "Fine," she said. "Then I guess we do this the hard way." She went to their room and closed the door. An hour later, she left again. This time, she took a suitcase. I stood at the window and watched her load it into her car. She did not look back. The days that followed were quiet. Unnaturally so. Detective Harris called twice with updates. The notary had declined to comment. Another family had come forward. Then another. "A pattern," he said. At home, my mother began to relax, just slightly. She asked fewer anxious questions. She slept longer at night. Evan stayed. He cleaned. He cooked. He did not talk much. One evening, as we sat at the table eating in silence, he looked up. "What if I lose everything?" he asked. "You already almost did," I said. "This way, at least it is honest." He nodded slowly. A week later, Rachel called again. "There is something else," she said. "Something you need to prepare for." "What?" "Tessa is not acting alone." I closed my eyes. "There is a group," she continued. "People who look for situations like this. Vulnerable homeowners, fractured families. They move fast and disappear faster. And Tessa. She is one of the recruiters." I set my phone down on the table and stared at the wall. The house was quiet, solid, still there. For the first time since this began, I understood the real shape of what I was fighting. This was never just about us. We were a case, and cases have momentum. Once they start moving, they do not stop until someone stops them. I looked at my mother across the room, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes soft. I had not chosen this fight, but now that I was in it, I understood something clearly. If I walked away, they would just find someone else. And I was not done standing in the way. The family meeting happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of night that feels ordinary until you realize later that nothing about it was. Tessa did not call it a meeting. She called it a conversation. She sent a group text saying we needed to clear the air, that things had gotten out of hand, that misunderstandings were piling up. The message ended with a smiling emoji that made my stomach tighten. I agreed to it for one reason only. I wanted witnesses. By the time everyone arrived, the sun had already dropped behind the houses across the street. The living room lights were on, casting sharp shadows along the walls. The air conditioner hummed steadily, loud enough to fill the pauses between sentences. My aunt sat on the couch. 2 cousins perched on folding chairs pulled in from the garage. Evan sat stiffly near the end table, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother sat in her usual chair by the window, a blanket over her legs, her expression cautious and tired. Tessa stood. She did not sit down. She paced slowly, like someone preparing to present a case. "I just want everyone to understand what is really going on here," she began. "There has been a lot of exaggeration, a lot of unnecessary fear." She looked directly at me. "Some people have taken normal planning and turned it into something ugly." I said nothing. She continued, voice calm, almost soothing. "We were trying to make sure your mother was protected, that her affairs were in order, that there would be no confusion later." My aunt frowned. "Confusion about what?" she asked. "About the house," Tessa replied smoothly. "About who makes decisions if something happens." She turned slightly, including the room. And frankly, it has been difficult doing that with constant interference. I felt every eye drift toward me. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. I walked to the coffee table and placed a thick folder in the center of it. "This is what you call interference," I said. Tessa glanced at it, unimpressed. "Paper can say anything," she replied. "So can people," I said. I opened the folder. I laid out copies one by one. The quitclaim deed, the time-stamped recording date, the comparison of my mother's signature from years earlier versus the one on the document. The still images from the doorbell camera, printed clearly enough that no one could pretend not to recognize the man with the briefcase. I did not explain. I did not accuse. I let the silence do the work. My aunt leaned forward, squinting at the pages. "This says the house was transferred," she said slowly. "Yes," I replied, without full disclosure, without capacity review, while my mother was recovering from a stroke. "That is not true," Tessa snapped. She knew exactly what she was signing. I turned to my mother. "Mom," I said, "do you remember signing papers that transferred ownership of your house?" She stared at the documents, confusion clouding her face. "No," she said. "I remember being tired." The room went still. Tessa stepped closer. "You asked me to help you," she insisted. My mother looked at her. "I asked you to help me with my pills," she said quietly. "Not my house." Evan flinched. Tessa laughed, sharp and defensive. "This is ridiculous." "She is confused." "That is exactly why planning was necessary." I picked up another page. "This is the notary who processed the document." I said. His name appears in multiple complaints involving elderly homeowners. I set down the bank records next. These are cash withdrawals attempted without my mother's knowledge. And this is a personal loan inquiry made in her name. My cousin sucked in a breath. You took out a loan in her name, she asked. Tessa's jaw tightened. Nothing was finalized, she said, and everything was going to be paid back. With what money? I asked. She ignored me and turned to Evan. Tell them, she said. Tell them this was for the best. Evan did not move. Tell them, she repeated, louder now. He looked up, eyes red. I cannot, he said. Tessa stared at him like she had not heard correctly. What? I cannot, he said again, because it was wrong. A murmur rippled through the room. Tessa's face hardened. Do not do this, she said quietly. You owe me. I owe our mother, Evan replied. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. You think this ends here, she said. You think these papers make you right. I stepped closer. I think the truth already did that, I said. Her eyes flicked around the room. She realized then what she had miscalculated. This was not a private argument she could control. This was not a daughter she could isolate. This was a room full of people who had just seen the story break apart. My aunt stood. I think this conversation is over, she said firmly. And I think you should leave. Tessa scoffed. This is my house too, she said. No, I said. It is not. She stared at me, disbelief flashing across her face. You do not get to decide that, she said. Actually, I do not, I replied. The county does. She looked at Evan one last time. If you walk away from this, she said, you lose everything. He met her gaze. Then I already did, he said. She said nothing else. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and jerky, and walked to the door. It closed behind her with a final, echoing sound. No one spoke for a long moment. My mother broke the silence. Am I still allowed to live here? She asked softly. I crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Yes, I said. This is your home. She nodded, relief flooding her face. After everyone left, the house felt strangely hollow, like something had been ripped out and the air had not rushed back in yet. Evan stayed behind. He sat at the kitchen table long after the others were gone, staring at his hands. I know I cannot undo it, he said finally. What I did? No, I said. But you can help stop it from happening again. He nodded. I will do whatever they ask, he said. The investigators. I will tell them everything. I believed him. That night, as I locked the doors and turned off the lights, I realized something that surprised me. The worst moment was not when Tessa tried to take the house. It was when the family almost believed her. Truth does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sets itself on the table, and waits to be seen. And once it is, nothing ever fits back together the same way again. The morning after the family meeting, the house felt stripped down to its frame. No decorations had been removed, no furniture moved, but something essential was gone. The constant tension, the second guessing, the need to read every word for hidden meaning. What replaced it was quieter and heavier. Consequences. Detective Harris called before 9. His voice was calm, professional, but there was a new firmness underneath it. We are moving forward, he said. We have enough corroboration to open a formal case. Against who? I asked. Against multiple parties, he replied, including the notary, the intermediary, and anyone who knowingly facilitated the transfer. I glanced at Evan, who sat across from me at the table, hands wrapped around a mug he had not touched. And Evan? I asked. There was a pause. Your brother's cooperation matters, Harris said carefully. It will be considered. That was the first time I heard the shape of the future out loud. The investigators came back that afternoon, this time with more people. Another detective, a woman from Adult Protective Services. They spoke to my mother gently, slowly, recording her answers, stopping when she grew tired. They did not push. They did not rush. They spoke to Evan next, alone, in the living room. I waited in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator cycle on and off, counting the seconds without meaning to. When they finished, Evan came out pale and shaken, but standing straighter than I had seen him in weeks. "I told them everything," he said quietly. I believed him. The days that followed were procedural: forms, statements, follow-up calls. The county issued a formal notice invalidating the transfer pending investigation. A bright red stamp appeared on the copy that came in the mail. Void under review. I pinned it to the bulletin board by the fridge where my mother could see it whenever she worried. At work, I told my foreman I might need flexibility. He did not ask questions. He just nodded and told me to take care of what I needed to take care of. Word spread through the family faster than I expected. Calls came in. Some supportive, some cautious. A few awkward attempts to smooth things over, to pretend this had all been a misunderstanding. I stopped explaining. The facts were on record now. Anyone who wanted to understand could. Evan kept his promise. He answered every call from investigators. He turned over messages, bank records, names. He admitted his role without minimizing it. One night, sitting on the back steps, he finally said what he had been avoiding. "They are saying I could be charged," he said. I nodded. "I know." He stared out at the dark yard. "I deserve it," he said. I did not argue. I also did not agree. 2 weeks later, Rachel called with an update that changed everything. "The case has expanded," she said. "Your mother's house is one of at least 6 properties connected through the same network." I closed my eyes. "They are targeting people with limited capacity and fractured families," she continued. "They use relatives as entry points. Your brother was not the first." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now it becomes bigger than your family, which is good and bad." Bad how? Once prosecutors get involved, they decide how far to go. Not us. That night, Evan did not sleep. Neither did I. The next day, a subpoena arrived addressed to him. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "I am scared," he said. "So am I," I replied. A week later, Tessa tried to make contact. Not directly. A mutual friend reached out, saying Tessa wanted to talk, that she was overwhelmed, that she felt betrayed, that she wanted to explain. I said no. She tried again through an email sent from an unfamiliar address. It was long, emotional, carefully written. She spoke about stress, about love, about how things had spiraled. She did not mention the house. She did not mention the money. She did not mention my mother. I forwarded it to Rachel and blocked the address. When investigators arrested the notary, it made the local news. Not front page, not dramatic, just a short article buried halfway down the site. Elder financial abuse investigation expands. Evan read it twice, then turned his phone face down. "This is real now," he said. It had been real for a long time. He was just catching up. A few days later, Detective Harris came by one last time to explain the next steps. There would be charges. Against multiple people, cooperation agreements, court dates. He did not promise outcomes. He promised process. "Your brother's testimony is significant," he said. "It may reduce his exposure, but not eliminate it," Evan said. "No," Harris replied. "Accountability still applies." After he left, Evan sat quietly for a long time. Then he looked at me. "If I could take it back," he said. I stopped him. "You cannot undo it," I said. "You can only decide who you are now." He nodded slowly. The hardest part came a week later, when the prosecutor called me directly. "We need your input on something," she said. "What kind of input?" I asked. "Regarding your brother." She explained the options. A narrower charge with cooperation, or broader charges that could include him as an active participant. The decision would not be entirely mine, but my position would matter. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wood grain. My mother watched me from her chair. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Something hard," I said. She reached out and touched my hand. "I do not want to lose him," she said softly. I swallowed. Neither do I. That night, Evan sat across from me again, waiting. I told him what the prosecutor had said. I told him the truth. All of it. He did not beg. He did not argue. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I will accept it." I looked at him for a long moment. This was the line I had not expected to stand on. Justice on one side, family on the other. And for the first time since all of this began, I understood that stopping harm did not always mean destroying everyone involved. Sometimes it meant choosing the path that left the least amount of damage behind. I did not know yet what I would choose. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about the house. It was about who would walk out of this still human, and who would not. I did not make the decision right away. That was the first thing I learned about real moral choices. They do not arrive with clarity. They arrive with weight. They sit on your chest and wait to see whether you will rush or breathe. For 3 days, I went through the motions of normal life. I went to work. I wired panels. I ate lunch out of a paper bag. I nodded at coworkers who had no idea my family was being dissected by the legal system. At night, I came home and made soup for my mother and sat across from Evan at the table, the space between us filled with everything we were not saying. The prosecutor called again on the 4th day. "We are finalizing charging decisions," she said. "This is the window." I thanked her and asked for until the end of the day. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I went into the backyard and sat on the concrete step, the same place where the family gathering had happened weeks earlier. The grill was still there, unused. One of the folding chairs leaned against the fence like it had been abandoned, mid-sentence. I thought about justice the way I had always understood it. Clean lines. Cause and effect. You do harm, you pay for it. That version of justice was simple. This was not. Evan came outside and sat beside me without speaking. We listened to the hum of traffic in the distance, the faint bark of a dog somewhere down the block. "I am not asking you to save me," he said finally. I looked at him. "I am asking you not to lie about who I am." That was when it shifted. I saw him not as the brother who had helped sign papers, not as the legal name on a fraudulent deed, but as the scared, flawed person sitting next to me who had been pulled into something he did not fully understand and then could not get out of. That did not make him innocent, but it made him human. That afternoon, I drove to Rachel's office. She did not interrupt while I spoke. She listened the way good lawyers do, without nodding, without reacting, letting the silence do its work. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "If you advocate for a cooperation-focused resolution for your brother," she said, "he will still face consequences. Probation, financial restitution, mandatory counseling. He will not walk away untouched." "And if I do not?" I asked. "Then the system will treat him like the others," she said. "Because the system does not grade on intent, only on actions." I stared at the floor. "What would you do?" I asked. She shook her head. "I am not the one who has to live with it." When I got home, Evan was waiting. I told him everything. What cooperation would mean, what it would cost him, what it would not protect him from. He listened without interrupting. "If you do this," I said, "you will be a witness, not a victim. You will have to testify. You will have to say out loud what you did, in front of people who will judge you." He nodded. "I deserve that." "And you will lose things," I continued. "Friends, reputation, opportunities." He nodded again. "I already did." I watched his face carefully, looking for hesitation, for manipulation, for anything that felt like the old Evan trying to escape consequences. I did not see it. I saw fear. I saw shame. And I saw something else. Relief. That night, after my mother went to bed, I called the prosecutor back. I told her my position. I was careful with my words. I did not excuse. I did not minimize. I did not pretend Evan had been tricked into signing his name. I told her that he had acted wrongly, and that he was willing to fully cooperate, testify, and accept accountability. I told her that removing him completely would not undo the harm, but destroying him would not repair it either. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "We will take that into consideration," she said. When I hung up, I felt like I had stepped off a ledge without knowing where I would land. The next week was agony. No updates, no answers, just waiting. Evan stayed quiet, almost reverent, as if he was afraid to move the air too much. He cooked meals. He took my mother to appointments. He cleaned the house without being asked. One afternoon, my mother took my hand. "I know something bad happened," she said. I do not remember all of it, but I know you protected me. I swallowed. And your brother, she added. He is hurting. I nodded. She squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, she said. Even if it hurts. 2 days later, the call came. The prosecutor's voice was steady. Your brother will be charged with a lesser offense contingent on full cooperation, she said. He will not face incarceration if he complies with all conditions. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. Do not thank me, she replied. He still has a long road ahead. When I told Evan, he did not celebrate. He sat down heavily in a chair and covered his face with his hands. I am not free, he said. No, I replied. But you are not lost. The case moved forward quickly after that. Tessa was charged. The intermediary was charged. The notary faced multiple counts. Properties were frozen. Families came forward. Stories poured out that sounded painfully familiar. Evan testified. I sat in the courtroom and watched him stand, hands shaking, voice unsteady but clear. He did not deflect. He did not soften his role. He told the truth exactly as it was. When he stepped down, he did not look at me. He did not need to. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions. I said nothing. I had learned that silence, used correctly, is not weakness. Weeks later, when it was over, when the headlines faded and the calls stopped, the house felt different again. Not tense, not heavy, just quiet. Evan moved out. Not because I asked him to, but because it was necessary. Accountability does not mean staying comfortable. We did not hug when he left. But we did not turn our backs either. That night, I sat alone in the living room, lights off, listening to the hum of the house. I thought about the version of myself who believed justice meant watching someone fall. That was not what this was. This was choosing to pull one person back while pushing a system forward. It was harder. It was messier. And it was the first decision in this entire ordeal that felt truly mine. I did not save my brother. I did not destroy him. I stood still long enough to let him choose what kind of man he would be next. And sometimes, that is the most justice you can give. The house did not change overnight. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly felt healed. No music swelling in the background. No sense of victory. What happened instead was quieter. The house exhaled. In the weeks after the case concluded, routines returned in small, careful steps. My mother woke up at the same time every morning and sat by the window with her coffee. I reset her medication schedule with a new lockbox, this time one she could open herself with a simple code. Her doctor adjusted her prescriptions. A social worker checked in once a month, polite and thorough, a presence that made sure no one ever tried to make decisions in the dark again. The locks were changed. This time, I was the one holding the keys. I took down the beige folder and replaced it with a fireproof box bolted into the closet floor. Inside it were copies of everything that mattered, labeled clearly, organized the way things should have been from the start. My mother knew what was in it. She knew what each paper meant. We went through them together, slowly, more than once. She asked the same questions sometimes. I answered them every time. At work, life moved on as if nothing had happened. I finished the project in Tempe. I picked up overtime again. I climbed ladders and ran conduit, and came home sore and tired in the way that feels honest. Some days, in the middle of a task, the memory of it all would hit me. The backyard, the folding chairs, Tessa's calm voice saying the house was already gone. Each time, the memory ended the same way now. It was not gone. It never had been. Evan kept his distance at first. He called once a week, then less often. When he did, the conversations were short and careful. He talked about counseling, about the job he had found through a friend of a friend, about how strange it felt to tell the truth without trying to soften it. I listened. I did not advise. I did not rescue. That was part of the agreement I had made with myself. Accountability meant letting him carry his own weight. Months later, he came by one afternoon to drop off some mail that had been forwarded to him by mistake. He stood in the doorway like a guest, not a resident. "The house feels different," he said. I nodded. "So do I," he replied. We stood there for a moment, neither of us reaching for something to say. Then he handed me the envelope and left. That was enough. The trial wrapped up quietly. No grand sentencing scene, no satisfying speech. Tessa pled to reduce charges in exchange for cooperation. The network fractured. Some of the people involved disappeared into plea deals and probation, and quiet consequences that never make headlines. But families got their houses back. That mattered. One afternoon, I received a letter from a woman in another part of the state. She had found my name through court records. She thanked me for speaking up. She said her mother's house had been saved because the investigation reached their county in time. I read the letter twice and then put it in the fireproof box. Not as a trophy. As a reminder, my mother improved, slowly. Not in dramatic leaps, but in inches that added up. She laughed more. She forgot less. She began correcting me when I misremembered small things from my childhood, and I let her. Sometimes we sat on the porch in the evening, watching the sun slide down behind the houses across the street. The sprinkler clicked on. The air smelled like cut grass and hot concrete. One evening, she said something that caught me off guard. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "I think they thought I was already gone." I looked at her. "Gone how?" I asked. She tapped her temple. "They talked around me," she said. "Like I was furniture. Like I would not notice." My throat tightened. "But you noticed," I said. She smiled. "I noticed who stayed," she said. That was the closest thing to forgiveness I needed. The house settled into itself again. The walls stopped feeling like witnesses. They were just walls. I fixed the loose outlet in the hallway. Replaced a cracked tile in the bathroom. Painted over a scuff mark near the door where something had once hit it in anger. Each repair was small. Together, they meant everything. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the choice I had made. The line I had stood on when the prosecutor asked for my input. The version of justice I had almost chosen. It would have been simpler to burn everything down. Cleaner, maybe. But that would have left ashes where people still had to live. What I chose instead was harder to explain and harder to defend. I chose to stop the harm without becoming it. I chose to protect my mother without pretending my brother was a stranger. I chose to let the truth do the damage it needed to do, and no more. That choice did not make me a hero. It made me responsible. On the anniversary of the day the locks were first changed, I took a day off work again. Not for an appointment, not for paperwork, just a day. My mother and I drove out of the city and ate lunch at a small place off the highway. She ordered pie and ate half of it. I ate the other half. On the drive home, she rested her hand on my arm. "You did not lose your way," she said. I smiled. "I almost did," I replied. But I did not. That night, I sat alone in the living room, lights low, listening to the hum of the house. The sound was familiar now, comforting. I thought about everything I had believed at the beginning of this story. That being quiet would keep the peace. That family loyalty meant enduring harm. That justice only counted if someone paid the highest price. All of that had collapsed. What replaced it was smaller, sturdier, and harder to break. Sometimes, the right ending is not watching someone fall. Sometimes, it is watching the ground hold, and knowing that, this time, you helped make it strong enough.